Welcome to Mr. Gister. This episode is going to give you a look into the life of the real Johnny Appleseed. Now, it might be because I'm from the Northeast and Johnny allegedly lived in my hometown for a while, but I feel like a grossly disproportionate amount of my elementary school education was centered around this guy. I always classified him as a Paul Bunyan type character, but as it turns out, he did in a lot of ways live up to his own legend. So let's first start off with what the average person probably envisions when they hear Johnny Appleseed. We've got a scraggly looking dude, average height, bare feet, burlap sack for a shirt, and a metal pot for a hat. He's known for roaming the countryside, throwing apple seeds as he goes so that the struggling residents of a budding America will have apples to eat long after he becomes apple tree fertilizer himself. He was supposed to be a friend of all the Indians and refused to harm wildlife, even bees and mosquitoes. So in our collective imagination, Johnny is basically a whimsical, pacifistic, apple-loving hobo. Now I've got to say, when I first started researching this video, I was fully expecting to debunk this image. But in this case, a lot of it surprisingly checks out. Note that the earliest American print record of Johnny Appleseed was his obituary. There were also a few first-hand accounts from folks who met him while he was still alive, but they were written and compiled after his death. Still, historians and folklorists have been able to compile a decent picture of what the real Johnny Appleseed was like. So Jonathan A. Seed was born in, his name was John Chapman, and he was born in Leominster, Massachusetts in 1774. His father fought in the Battle of Bunker Hill but survived the Revolutionary War, while his mother died from complications associated with childbirth in 1776. Not much is known about his childhood, but at the age of 18, Johnny headed west with his 11-year-old brother, and they ended up in Ohio. But they lived a nomadic lifestyle, so likely traveled through quite a few states. It's thought that around this time, Johnny began honing his apple orcharding skills. In 1805, some 13 years after leaving Massachusetts, Johnny's father caught up to him and his brother and purchased a large family farm in Ohio. At this point, John struck out fully on his own. Let's first look at Johnny Appleseed's most prominent feature, his bag of apple seeds that he would allegedly empty as he wandered around the American frontier, planting apple trees for hungry pioneers. In reality, he would not randomly toss around seeds hoping apples would grow. Instead, he would identify land ideal for apple orchards, purchase it, plant a nursery, then move on. He would have neighbors tend to the orchards, allowing them to sell trees as payment, and return every couple years to check on his real estate purchases. He amassed thousands of acres of cultivated orchard land by the end of his life through this process. As for the apples themselves, it was highly unlikely anyone was actually eating them. Apples were rarely eaten at all at this point in American history, but they were occasionally used for baking or for animal feed. Apples used for food typically required grafting, something Johnny was against for reasons that will become clear soon. The apples his orchards were producing were predominantly used for hard cider. They were cider apples. Early on, he would get his seeds for free from cider pressing operations who were just tossing them out as garbage. Michael Pollan, author of The Omnivore's Dilemma, probably said it best. Really, what Johnny Appleseed was doing, and the reason he was welcome in every cabin in Ohio and Indiana, was he was bringing the gift of alcohol to the frontier. He was our American Dionysus. Pollan touches on another important element of Johnny Appleseed's persona here. Because he was walking around from orchard to orchard all over the Midwest, he didn't really have a home base. Instead, he would just kind of couch surf, or more accurately hearth surf, during his travels. He was extremely popular among the pioneering folk because he was basically giving everyone free booze trees. Now, as for Johnny's weird getup, it partially comes from his nomadic lifestyle. It was tough to keep up a pioneer chic wardrobe being so mobile, but still, a sack for a shirt, no shoes, pot for a head. It's at this point I need to address something called the New Church, also known as Swedenborgianism. Swedenborgianism was a Christian sect started by Emanuel Swedenborg. Swedenborg had a bunch of pretty wacky beliefs, but I'm going to list 4 here that are integral to understanding our boy Johnny. First, he thought that souls are put on earth by God and human bodies are clothes for these souls. By extension, clothing, or lack thereof, has a special significance. Basically, Swedenborg argued that the more ostentatious your clothing, the shittier of a person you are. Nudity, if practical, is ideal. Now, this is a pretty major oversimplification, and if you're a friggin' nerd and want to learn more about Swedenborgian habiliment theory, definitely check out the articles referenced in the description. Second, Swedenborg preached that all living things, including animals, have souls. Third, Swedenborg believed that love for God and charity toward the neighbor were the two pillars that made up the Christian church. Last, he taught that suffering on the mortal plane would lead to eternal happiness in heaven. Johnny Appleseed was a fervent believer in Swedenborgianism. He would often travel back east for the sole purpose of getting new Swedenborgian literature. He would use his nomadic orchard development scheme as a means to preach this religion throughout the region to everyone he came across. Now, I mentioned above that the oldest American print record of him was his obituary, but he actually was referenced during his lifetime in a British Swedenborgian publication that praised his preaching of the good word as well as his cultivation skills. Anyway, knowing the depths of his Swedenborgian dogma, his strange getup and eccentric behavior really fall into place. He would not want to wear ostentatious clothes, so repurposing sacks for shirts or wearing tattered remains of clothing would be his go-to. Because all living things have souls, he would not want to harm anything, including bees. There are all kinds of stories that demonstrate this behavior. Some of them historians even believe are actually true. He became a vegetarian later in life. He was against domestication of all kinds. This extended to the grafting of plants. He would rescue animals from trappers' snares, and he would not even kill mosquitoes. There is this one anecdote where apparently a rattlesnake once attacked and bit him, and as a reflex, he cut it down with a scythe. He then later went back to check on the rattlesnake to see if it was okay. Turns out the little guy did not make it, and Johnny felt terrible. Anyway, because of his belief in charity, he would have no problem gifting his abundance of cider trees to people in exchange for them looking after his orchards. He was also known for trading his clothes that were in good condition for rags that were in bad condition, and then would wear those. Lastly, he would prefer to go barefoot not only to increase his nakedness, but also because going barefoot sucks, and he believed the discomfort would help him get in God's good graces. Not really sure about the pot on his head. Apparently he actually did do this on occasion, but I was not able to find a solid reason why. It was probably just easier than carrying it. Now, because this is 2021, and tarnishing the legacy of historical figures with a strong dose of objective fact is in vogue, I did want to point out a few oopsies Johnny made. First of all, Johnny had a habit of planting dog fennel, a medicinal herb which in high doses can cause liver failure, along with his apple orchards. Dog fennel is now considered an invasive species that can mess up pasture lands, and most modern conservationists and farmers would have been super stoked if he didn't spread it all around Middle America. Also worth noting is that despite Johnny having a pretty solid reputation with the Indians, his orchard scheme helped facilitate the displacement and destruction of Indian tribes in the American West. Well after his death, the stories started flowing that he was basically revered as some type of holy man by all Indian tribes, but accounts closer to his actual life paint a different picture. There are stories of him being chased by Indians, of Indians stealing from him, and of him running around to different villages warning of what turned out to be imagined Indian raids. By the end of his life, Johnny had never passed on his apple seed to any woman, so he died childless, but he believed that he would meet a woman in heaven. The guy was super optimistic about heaven, you gotta give him that. He was able to pass on over 1,200 acres of apple tree nurseries to his sister, and the effect that he had on the Midwest settlers' lives is immeasurable. As for Johnny's demise, nobody is quite sure the exact date of his death, but it was most likely March 18, 1845. The obituary that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, which was from the Fort Wayne Sentinel, read in part that the deceased was well known through this region by his eccentricity and the strange garb he usually wore. He followed the occupation of a nurseryman and has been a regular visitor here for upwards of 10 years. He is supposed to have had considerable property, yet denied himself the most common necessities of life, not so much perhaps for avarice as from his peculiar notions on religious subjects. He was a follower of Swedenborg and devoutly believed that the more he endured in this world, the less he would have to suffer, and the greater would be his happiness hereafter. His death was quite sudden.